So this is an annual webinar we do to review kind of the state of the industry, what we are seeing in trends in the industry, and go through our numbers so you guys can use that as you are planning out your year, kind of with a little more insight into the national trends. A couple of quick parameters about how we get this information and what it kind of means, what it includes. This is all data from RunSignup. We can't access data from other registration platforms. I wish we could to make this 100% of the information that's out there. But we do have a ton of races and organizations on our platform. We have about 50% of the market share in the endurance market. So it's a pretty sizable and meaningful amount of data that we can look at that we think does represent a pretty wide range of the industry and is pretty representative. That said, it is entirely plausible that there is something here and there that is specific to RunSignup that may make some of these numbers slightly different than you might see elsewhere. If we know that there is something that we do that other people don't, etc., we do try to note that, but that is the kind of caveat to this, is we can't actually know 100% what is not on our platform. This data is not actually a calendar year. We refer to it as our 2025 data. However, it actually runs from December of 2024 until the end of November of 2025. And the reason for that is purely logistical. We want to be able to share this data pretty early in the year so that people can use it as they're setting up kind of their plans for the year. And if we wait until the end of December to do that, we won't have time to pull it all together for you guys. So we do run it on a slightly off year. There is also a little bit of data at the end that is from the 2025 Timer Market Survey. I'm not going to go over a lot of that because Shelly is going to cover that in great detail next week. But we do have a couple of things that we include there from that. So this slide doesn't really tell you anything that's happening in the market. We include these numbers to give you a look at kind of what the scale of the data is and how that breaks down by different event types. This is all of the data on RunSignup, including all of the races and all of the registrations, including imported registrations. And that means if you just look at this and you say, hey, it looks like there was 1.5 million more registrations in 25 and 24, that sounds great, but this includes growth of our platform and includes new races coming onto our platform. So it doesn't really tell you anything for yourselves. The real thing that this tells you is that it does include a whole lot of data, about 97,000 race events, and that includes each individual distance as its own event. So a 5K and a 10K within the same race weekend would be included as two events for this counting, for this type of count, and about 12.1 million registrations. That's into the actual data. So the very first question that we want to ask every year is, are races growing? How competitive is the market this year? And we still have some pretty good news on this front. We saw about 5% growth on average across the year. And what we do to determine that is we actually only look at the events that are on RunSignup in 2024 and 2025, because that pulls out any of those kind of data points that are new races coming on where we don't know what happened to them last year. So this is only races that we can look at the numbers for both years, and it did grow about an average of 5%. That is a little bit of slowing coming out of COVID. I think 2023, we saw an 11% per race growth and 8% last year. That said, that kind of rocket ship growth was not possible forever. And so this is still a positive sign that races are being competitive. I had something else I was going to say there, but I forget, so I guess I won't. We'll move on from there. Participation month to month. So this looks at that same kind of number across the entire year. So how much races grew in each month. And you can see some slowing here, March through kind of June, July time slot, where there is some growth, but it is a little bit more subdued. The exception to that really is November, where we saw really high growth. And I think that is something that we have kind of a factor we see in a couple of different places that I would consider just the turkey trot factor. Turkey trots have continued to grow at an astronomical rate, and we've seen that both in terms of the number of races appearing for turkey trots and also growth within turkey trots. So actual races that were on Thanksgiving, we saw an 11% growth from 2024 to 2025. So that does impact that November number, and honestly, even the annual numbers a good bit. The one thing I will say is we did not run race to race averages for any growth pre-COVID. We used to do a 2019 to 2022, 2019 to 2023. Back in 2023, we saw that races on an average were down about 1%. And we know that they grew on 8% last year and 5% this year. So we do know that the growth we saw this year is above and beyond the levels that we saw of participation pre-COVID. So that's a positive sign that we've seen growth, not just recovery, but actual true growth within the market. Not all races are equal, and so there are different factors that impact growth. We have seen much slower growth in general for larger races over the last 3 years than we have for smaller races, and that kind of gap has come down a little bit. I think maybe 23 or 24 was like 16% growth for small races and like 2 for large races. So we are seeing that gap kind of narrow a little bit, but you do still see faster growth for smaller local races. That kind of makes sense in the context of where you are getting participants. It's much easier to attract new participants within kind of a local realm. If you are getting to a race that is over 5,000 people, you are probably relying some on travel, and that can be a much harder ask for people to come out to your race. This ties into another report we do. This is actually not a part of the RaceTrends report, but it is one that we do annually, and I think it is worth talking about when we talk about large events. And this is a report that Eric on our team pulls together to look at the top 100 largest races in the country. This is a very manual report. He has to do this by literally going through all of the results platforms for these races. So sometimes we have corrections. If you see anything that you don't understand, always feel free to reach out to us. We want to make this as accurate as possible. What this does is tip just at that very top of the market. And so these are races over 9,000 people. And in that end, we saw on average races grew 6.5%. That's actually, not only is that higher than the average growth we saw for races over 5,000, that's higher even than what we saw across all races. And I think what that tells us is that there is a little bit of divide here where some of the smaller races are finding opportunities to grow, and we are seeing increased attention and excitement about some of the very largest kind of premier races in the country. But some of those, I would consider them large races, but mid-sized large races, if you're talking kind of the 2,000 to 9,000 range, are having a little bit of a harder time kind of breaking out of that size and growing to the next step. About 33 races exceeded 20,000 participants in 2025, and we had 11 races that were new to the list in 2025. Of those, 3 were brand new races in the market. The others were races that had grown. And there is a fair amount of shifting that you see kind of especially on the bottom end of this list every year, because there's just a lot of races that are competitive within that 8,000 to 10,000 range. Repeat participation. I think the 2 things that I always note on this is this is not quite as bad as it sounds. So if I say only 17% of your runners are going to come back next year, it sounds really dire. I don't think it is actually indicative of what you really see on race day. And the reason for that is that this only looks at the same race distance to the same race distance. So if you have a race with a 5K and a 10K, and I run the 5K this year and I run the 10K next year, it's not going to reflect that as a repeat participant there. So I think your real day-to-day repeat participation rate, what you see on your dashboard, and if you go in and look at loyalty, should be higher than this. But this is a good starting point to say, I also don't think loyalty is as good as most race directors believe. And I think that's because we go out to a race on race day and we see people that we've seen last year, we've seen every year before. And so we feel like we have people who are really loyal and coming back year after year, but it is actually really hard to get people back. And I think an emphasis on doing loyalty programs, whether that is a discount they get for being a loyal runner, whether that is kind of a 10-year program for your runners who've come many years, a gift, even if it's just a notation on their bib, some way of making people feel special when they come back year over year can be really valuable for building kind of long-term runners in your events. Race Turn is another very manual report that we do. Lewis puts this together each year, And because it is extremely manual, this actually only looks at races with more than 500 runners. So this does not include the thousands of races that we have that are smaller than that. But what we do for this is to actually take a look at races that are on our platform this year that we did not have, the races that were on our platform last year that we do not see on our race list this year. And we track them down to figure out what happened to them. One of the things we track there is competitor churn, races that left us, because we want to know if there are things that we should be doing better. And we were about 0.9% of 2024 races we saw leave for a competitor in 2025. Obviously, we want everyone to like us and stay with us, but also that we feel pretty good about that number. That 99.1% of our customers are very happy in staying with us. The other thing that I think is more valuable for the industry as a whole is we look at races then that just didn't happen in 2025, and we call that our no race churn. For that, we saw just 3.1% of races from 2024 did not recur in 2025, and that is very low. I think when we first started tracking this in 2017, 2018, we were seeing about a 5 to 7% churn rate at that point. There are a few years in there that I can't really report a very clean churn number, because between 2020 and 2022, there were a number of races that skipped a year but did come back, and so it gets a little bit messy about what actually disappeared. But 3.1 is really low. I think we were 3.8 last year, and we thought that was quite low. And I think there's kind of two sides of this. One is that is a very, very good sign for the market. Races are being able to be viable. They are able to continue to go on, and they feel like it is a reasonable business. So I think that is overall a positive for the market. It does mean if you're a new race director looking to introduce new races, you might have a harder time finding open slots that are obvious on your race calendar, where you think this is a good point to add a race, because there aren't kind of those gaps left by races leaving. But overall, I think the stability suggested here is a really good sign going into 2026. Distribution of races. The one thing that we look at here, I think if you just look at what the percentages of races in each month are, it's pretty intuitive. I think it's exactly what you'd think. May and June are very high. September, October, November are very high. Kind of our better weather seasons hold the bulk of races. But I do like this chart on the left here that shows kind of how that relates to the number of registrants. And I think that's interesting because it kind of tells you whether or not it looks like there's an appropriate amount of races for runners. I would say, again, I would take November slightly out of this calculation, because I think November is entirely an anomaly because of turkey trots. But if you're looking for places where maybe there are some gaps in the market where there might be room, finding some of these where it looks like there are kind of more races coming in here, the runner's just a little bit lighter for that season, and so maybe there is some more room there to add more events. Event trends. So looking at demographics, we have about 53% of participants in 2025 identified as women. We've been consistent as long as we've been doing this report, which I think the first year was 2017. We've consistently seen women as the majority of runners out there. This has narrowed a good bit, though, over the last couple of years. I think at one point we were up to like 56% were women. And we do see this kind of year by year getting a little bit tighter. So I do think that will be interesting to watch. About 0.2% of participants identified as non-binary. Then you look at this kind of bucket down here that's NA. That's typically going to be untimed races, fun runs, where the race directors did not actually ask for gender information. Didn't matter because they weren't timing it, they weren't giving awards. And so that's just people we actually can't report on at all. Participation by age. So over the last few years, and actually this conversation started even before COVID, there was a lot of concern about declining numbers of young adult participants. And we kind of defined that within that 18 to 29-year-old age bracket. And we had seen that gradually decline in the years leading up to COVID. And then that age group really did not take kindly to virtual races. And we saw a very significant drop-off of participation by young adults through 2020, 2022. We have seen that ticking back up, and I think there's been a ton of conversation about how do we reach younger runners, what are ways that we can market to younger runners who maybe aren't responding to our emails or our kind of older marketing styles. And this year is a really, really good sign. It's 17.9% of 2025 participants were between 18 and 29. That is the best we have seen since, I think, 2017, maybe 2018. But definitely a good sign that we've come back up a long way there. You can kind of see where we fall. So I do think that is positive. I think that's probably a combination of races getting smarter and using newer social media platforms, trying to do more social outreach through running clubs and things like that. I do think races have made some progress in how they're marketing. I also think some of that is just it took some time for young adults coming out of COVID to get back in the habit of looking for events and joining events. And so some of that is just a natural slower rebound. The other thing that is kind of interesting from this is we did see a slight uptick as well in 60 and over runners. I think that also is a positive sign that we're seeing people hold on a little bit longer, come out for events for years that maybe in the past they thought they were done. Race sizes. This is one of my favorite topics to kind of look at, because I think when you talk to people about running, and I think especially you guys as race organizers, I imagine if you talk about putting on races, I think the first thought that a lot of people have is like, the New York Marathon. It's this massive event where there are thousands and thousands of people running through a city street, and those obviously exist, but most races are not at all like that. It's about 86% of all race weekends. So that is including, if you have multiple distances and multiple events, the whole race weekend is still under 500 participants. Most races out there really are smaller community events that are built around small charities. They're built around neighborhoods. They're built around running communities. They're really pretty hyper local. And I think you kind of want to keep an eye on that when you're thinking about how your race grows, because there's something to be said there for the fact that most runners are experiencing these kind of small races. That means that maintaining that kind of community feel and that connection to charity can be really, really valuable. And I think having kind of a range of experience, bringing your community races up just one tiny notch can go really far in terms of having a more efficient race day, a more streamlined race day, making sure your packet pickup is really smooth. You do things like that kind of make your race feel a little bit bigger, but you don't actually need to have a 5,000 person race to be successful and to reach a lot of people. Most people's experiences are with races that are a lot smaller. When runners register, this has been an interesting one to track, because I think over the years we have seen largely that all races, this pattern stays pretty consistent. For years, I have said it never changes. We've been between 24 and 26% register on race week every year. This is the furthest we've ever gotten away from that, and we're down to 23.7% on race week, so that's interesting. You can kind of see, if you look at the change here, the biggest change is that people have been actually registering earlier. We've been seeing fewer registrations in the month of the race. I will note those are pretty small changes. I don't think those are going to significantly overhaul kind of the patterns that you're seeing. They are really pretty mild shifts, but I do think that is notable, that we are seeing people actually commit a little bit earlier, not just than they did during COVID or just out of COVID, but actually in pre-COVID as well. This is a more useful chart if you are actually trying to think about your registration schedule. And I will note that if you want to see the full numbers that tie to this, so you can actually make sense of this pretty graph here, RunSignup.com/trends, and we'll send this out with the webinar, has all of the data, and there are actual numbers tied to that you can look at as well. Just can't put everything on slides here. But your registration patterns really are very heavily reliant on distance. So across the board, we see kind of a similar trend in that you get a nice rush of runners early in registration periods, things die off for a little bit, and then we get a good kind of mid-session bump here. People start registering rapidly again, typically around the 1 to 2 months out range. A little bit of a die-off again, and then kind of last race week rush. I will say I think some of this mid-session hump here comes a little bit from price increases that often occur around that time. But I do think it's interesting that we see that trend kind of across all distances. The big things that you're going to need to pay attention to in terms of distance is really the kind of cycle for registration varies pretty widely by distance. So 53% of marathon runners registered more than 3 months out, and you have a pretty small number of marathon runners registering here. This one, yeah, it's this one, registering here on race week. On the flip side, very few 5K runners are registering more than 3 months out, but you're seeing, half of them registering, more than half of them registering in the last month, 62% registering in the last month. And so this is useful for your own planning, I think, on two ways. One, it's good to kind of know where you should be as you're projecting your numbers out for the year. The other thing that I think can be useful is kind of figuring out where within these time schedules you want to schedule your price increases so that you are able to have an impact when people are ready to buy. Average prices, I don't think anyone will be surprised to see that prices have increased. We've seen increases really across the board here over the last year, and I do think, when we look at prices, I'm just actually going to go to this one. This is looking at prices over the last 6 years, so comparing our prices to 2019 prices. Obviously, we've seen price increases there for several reasons. One is if you looked at those 2020 prices, they were, artificially deflated because the vast majority of races that year, and still a significant portion over the next 2 years, were virtual races. Virtual races have lower overhead, so even if they're longer distance, they tend to be much cheaper. So I think the initial kind of trend here, these 2 years, was just renormalizing prices a little bit. I also think that race directors were nervous to increase prices above their 2019 levels. Coming right out of COVID, they were nervous about, not being able to get people back out after that long of a gap, and held off a little bit. And so I think because of that, we have seen a little bit of a higher rate price increase for real races over the last 2 years than maybe we would have. 21% price increase since 2019 for 10Ks is kind of the largest gap that we see there, but across all distances, it is definitely a notable increase. And on the one hand, there's nothing entirely you can do. You can't artificially keep your prices low. We know permitting costs have gone up in a lot of places. Inflation has been a huge impact on events. There's been tariffs that have been made an impact on events. So you have to be able to meet your costs. If you need to raise your prices, you will not be alone in doing that. But I do think it's useful to be a little bit kind of creative and think about, are there ways to make money other than price increases? Can we sell kind of premium experiences where we sell for, we have runners who pay for having, very close parking on site, or they have their own tent or their own porta potty. Can we make some money on add-ons? Can we sell food and drink? Like whatever the types of things are that makes sense for your event, seeing if there's other ways to boost revenue that isn't just prices, or if there's ways that you want to save money, make your race shirts an optional add-on instead of offering them for free. Those are some things you can look at to see if there are other ways to think about your pricing beyond just kind of our normal standard set your price. Price increases. So this talks about how many price increases there are throughout a race's cycle. Unsurprisingly, longer distances are going to have more price increases because longer distances typically have a longer registration pattern. They typically have higher prices. So there's more room in there to build in price increases. I do still think this is kind of shockingly low. One price increase on average for a 5K, less than 2 for a half marathon. I think many of those races could stand to add one more price increase. I think in general, it makes sense for most races to have at least 2, one midway through to encourage people to actually register so you can start getting them off the chair and thinking about actually committing to the event. And then one either race week or race day. I think when you have people registering that late within the schedule, they are not necessarily motivated by price, or they would have registered earlier. And you can use those kind of super procrastinators as a little bit of a lever where you can get a little bit of extra funding for your race by having them pay a little bit more for the inconvenience of being so late. The caveat that I will add this year that I have not in the past, but I have gone to a race a couple of times lately, and I just realized how many emails I get from them and looked this up. I will not name them, but they have 8 price increases for a 5K. And so I think I learned from that it is worth noting you can have too many. If people are getting an email every week or every month, the price is going up, those no longer resonate because the price is always going up, and so it no longer strikes much of a note there. So it is possible to have too many. I think depending on the length of your registration pattern, I would say 2 to 4 is probably where most races would fall. But that kind of depends on the setup of your actual registration. Minimum and maximum prices. This kind of goes along with what we were talking about in terms of how high and how low prices can go. So there is going to be a larger gap between my introductory early bird price and my race day price if I am a marathon than if I am a 5K, and that's just simply that the final prices are higher. You're probably not going to do a price increase for $2 because it's not an amount that people are going to respond to. So if you have a higher price range to begin with, you have a little bit more wiggle room and usually a little bit more time to change those as well. Why prices matter. We about 26% of registrations come within 3 days of a price increase or registration close. And I think the thing that is really important to note is it's not just about the price. It is that people need a reason to act. So if you have other reasons to act, if you have other time limited things that will make people say, yes, I want to do this now, it could be, if you register by X date, you get your t-shirt and you don't if you're registered later, or you have priority parking or whatever incentives you have. Those are other things you can use, but time limited incentives are important, and pricing is one of the easiest levers we can use for that. Giveaway sizing. So I do have data in there that kind of tracks across nationwide averages what sizes people pick. One of the things that we have within the platform is an option to set up unisex or male sizing and female sizing separately. Only about 2% of races do that. And I don't think that that's actually that only 2% of races offer female specific shirt sizing or kind of 2 divides of shirt sizes. I think they just don't always set it up using the sizing that way. I do know, however, that there are a lot of races that only offer unisex shirt sizes. And the one call out that I would make on that is that when we look at races with female specific shirt sizes, 29% of people who select those are selecting either an extra small or a small. And if you have only unisex shirt sizes, you likely don't have anything for that 29% of women. Typically, a unisex small is going to be the equivalent to a women's medium. And so you want to make sure that, if you're only doing unisex sizing, you are able to find ones with some smaller sizes available so that you can meet the demand of kind of that batch there. The other thing that I've seen a lot lately, and I think is not necessarily a terrible idea, is we see a lot of races, instead of citing, male shirts, female shirts, doing kind of a fitted shirt versus a relaxed shirt fit. I think that can be really useful because it allows you to have kind of a range of sizes within that, while also making it a little bit more inclusive. Maybe I just like my shirt to be baggier, but I'd feel uncomfortable picking a men's shirt. If it is described as a relaxed shirt, I might feel more like that can be for me as well, and vice versa for men who might want a more fitted style. It lets people pick the style they want without feeling like that is inherently tied to gender. Mobile, this looks at how many people are coming to your race websites from or on a mobile device or a tablet. I group those together, mobile and tablet, but I will say that tablet is like 1 to 1.5% of overall website views. So the vast majority of what we're looking at here is going to be on a mobile phone. So 3/4 of all people are seeing your website on a mobile phone. From that, 63% of all people are actually going through the registration process on their phone. And I think that is really, really important. to know. We have seen this kind of ticking up year over year as long as we've been doing this. And actually, I think it's the first time you can see ever so slightly this dropped this year on mobile. It was like 674.2 last year or something. But regardless, most people are seeing your information on phones. And so I know my workflow, I tend to work in front of a laptop all the time. I see everything on a big monitor. If you are doing your setups that way, make sure you're looking on your phone. Most, any of the RunSignup websites or email are going to be mobile responsive automatically. You still want to check your things because you might decide that you don't like it as much. Like it might actually correct, and so they can see it and they can read it, but you might not like the way it looks the same way you like it on desktop. And so making sure you're always checking things, and if you have a debate about which option looks better, go with the one that looks better on the phone, because that's how most people are going to interact with your race. In addition to that, this kind of ties to that. This kind of look at payments and how people pay is not specific to mobile phones, but I think the increase in paying on a mobile phone is a large part of why we've seen these numbers continuing to go up. We did also put out a new release later in this year that made it easier, I think probably around here where you can see that spike, made it easier for people to pay with Apple Pay from a desktop as well. But I think the big takeaway here is that people want it to be easy to pay. They don't want to enter their credit card every time. We saw, as this has been maturing, 42% of people paying with either Apple Pay or a saved credit card. That's a significant amount of your audience there. About 81% of that mobile traffic is on Apple currently. Processing fees, obviously that's an add-on to your race. We have seen over the years, the vast majority of races pass processing fees on to registrants, and that continues to be true. It's about 93% of races or processing fees this year were paid by registrants, not by races. That's useful to know because it is good to know that people are accustomed to seeing that and not going to be surprised by the processing fees on your race. We've been kind of keeping an eye on this because over the last 2 years, we've seen some states pass laws as well as an FTC ruling about fee transparency that requires in certain places now for your pricing to show as an all-in pricing that includes all fees. And that would mean that your race would have to say it is, it's $37.50 instead of saying it's $35 plus $2.50. And that, because of that, we have seen some races in states that have fee transparency laws opt to cover the processing fees, change their pricing, to increase their actual pricing and then absorb the fees themselves. The reason being that they want to have control over how that fee looks or how that pricing looks, that they want to have it say $25 versus $26.05, whatever the kind of difference is. And so I've been curious to see if that would notably impact how processing fees are being covered. And so far, it looks like it's pretty similar between last year and this year. So I don't think we've seen a noticeable shift, but that is something that we'll continue to watch if we continue to see more laws like that coming out. Taking a look at marketing and tools that you have within your dashboard. In 2025, 6.5% of registrations included a coupon. Average coupon price was $12.88. Yeah, coupons is one of those things that we wouldn't say you shouldn't use. You want to use judiciously. If you are giving out coupons all the time, people are going to wait for the coupons to register for your race, and no one's ever going to pay full price, or they are, and then they're going to be mad because if they waited 2 weeks, it would have been cheaper. I think there is a time and a place for coupons if you use them in a limited manner, and that would be making sure that there is a very strict time limitation on them for people to use them. There's some specific reason you are getting them, giving them out at that point. And I think the other thing that is useful here is just understanding that a coupon doesn't have to be a giant amount of money. Relatively small coupons can go pretty far. So if the average here is $12.88, you're getting a lot of coupons that are $5, $6, and that can still be a motivating factor. Referral Rewards is a program on our platform that allows runners to get a reward for bringing their friends to your race. And essentially the way that it works is that if I register and I will then get in kind of my confirmation, and as well as like the pop-up on the screen once I have registered, a unique link that says if you share this, you can earn a reward. We typically recommend setting the high threshold, high reward option for your referral programs. So that would mean that I would have to refer 3 to 5 friends is typically a good range. And if I do that, then I will get $15 to $20 refunded back to me, enough money to motivate me. And this works really well because a lot of people see the pop-up, they get their referral link, they share it with a couple of friends, 1 or 2 of them registers, and then they forget about it and they move on and they never reach that threshold. So they never get a refund, or they never get, you're never actually having to refund them, but you are still getting 1 or 2 more registrations from them. And if they do continue sharing, if they are really invested and they do get the 5 referrals, now you have 5 people you wouldn't have before. And that is really valuable for bringing people to your race. I'd say, we see the average on this is about 7% of total transaction dollars from referral rewards. I will note for races that really heavily invest in the referral programs, they have really great rewards. They promote it heavily on social media and in emails and on their website, and it's something that people really know about. We have seen that up to like 20–30% of registrations, but even 7% is not a small amount for your race. Groups and teams, this is a really, really consistent statistic. We've seen between 30 and 31% of participants join a team, and it's offered pretty much every year. I think teams are always a valuable thing to offer, and that doesn't mean it has to be a competitive team. For the majority of races, we see it is just social teams where they are invited to participate together. That sometimes means nothing. Sometimes it means there's a small incentive for it, but oftentimes it's literally just you can join up as a team. And there's 2 ways that I think that is really useful for races. One of them is simply that, if I have a team and I'm joining a team, I might be more likely to reach out to ask friends to join my team and run with me, and I'll bring more people to your race. But the other thing that I think is sometimes overlooked is simply that the racing experience is going to be more fun if I'm there with my friends. If I have built this team, I'm going to have a better time on race day. I'm going to hang out longer after. I'm going to, be cheering people on, and that's going to make my experience better, and that's going to make me more likely to invite an even larger team in the next year. I also think it is worth noting that the social aspect of races has been really important to some of our younger adult runners, and so providing them a way to participate that can be a really valuable part. The other thing you can do is you don't necessarily have to give a huge incentive. You don't necessarily have to give a refund for people who join teams. You can, but you don't have to. But I do think it's nice to do something that calls out the teams, whether that is, have a t-shirt contest where they're invited, not required, but teams are invited to make their own t-shirts, and you have a little reward for whoever's you pick is the best, or have a signboard that has all of the teams listed and a thank you, some way of acknowledging that the teams are there and are a valuable part of your race. Email marketing, I think continues to be a really important part of every race's marketing strategy. It sent over 800 million free emails in 2025 from our platform, and those have a pretty big return. So about 12% of registration dollars came directly from a RunSignup email, and that only tracks last touch. So that only is tracking if I opened my email and then I immediately registered. That also does not track emails sent from other platforms. So we do have customers who choose to pay for email, and they're using some other platform out there. That's not tracked in this. This is only looking at emails that came directly from RunSignup. And so we know that the real impact of email is actually even more than 12%. Like with anything, you can overdo it. You don't want to be sending emails constantly to your runners, and you want to be careful about having clean lists, particularly, if you have runners who haven't attended your race within the last 3 or so years, I would not recommend emailing them. It's gotten, they're much stricter on spam rules now. You want to make sure that your lists are extremely, extremely clean and accurate and updated. But you do want to be, re-engaging people year over year with email, both before the race and also as a touch point after the race to remind them of how much fun they had and kind of get them thinking about next year. Website traffic sources. So this is looking at how people got to race websites using our Google Analytics GA4 data. The two numbers I really like to pull out here, 29% of website traffic came from organic search. That means people who are, on Google looking for either your race specifically or a race, next race in Philadelphia that's a 5K, and they're finding your races that way. And so a large part of people are coming from organic search, and it's really important that your website is optimized to be found. If you do not know, go check yourself on Google and see where you come up. That is a really important part of reaching people. The other side we see for that is 25% of website traffic comes from referral sources. And this can be a wide range of things. It can be basically any website I was on that I clicked to get to your site. But a large number of these are going to be things like, a Running in the USA race calendar, Find a Race calendar, local race calendars that your timer may have or your local running store might have. And a lot of those people pull in automatically from RunSignup data. There's a bunch of affiliates out there. All of those that mentioned are affiliates that would come in and automatically pull in race data for events. But it's always worth checking locally to see if there are other calendars you are not on that you should be. That is pretty significant there. The one call out I'll have in this data that is not very good is our direct and email. The way that GA4 is tracking these does not track email really. It tends to note those links as direct links because someone is clicking on a link and then ending up directly on your website. So I think that is slightly misleading on both fronts. Hoping we'll actually be able to report on that a little bit better next year, but we will see. AI website traffic, obviously a big topic of the year is AI, and we are seeing that as a source for how people are finding races. Currently, it's a very, very small percentage. About 0.1% of website traffic came from ChatGPT and almost nothing from other AI sources. I will note, though, that that is a pretty rapid increase over the course of the year, and I think we know that AI is becoming kind of embedded in more and more places. So I would expect that number to increase pretty significantly over the next couple of years. The good news for that is that the things you want to do to show up well in AI are pretty much the same things you want to do to show up well in traditional search. Make sure you have good content and thorough content and accurate content on your website. And that's going to be a really good first step to showing up well in AI as well. Nonprofits and donations are a big part of most of the races on our platform. This looks at how much the average person gives and how much that actually, how much of a big impact that is for races across the platform. So, it's worth noting that most people give little amounts. So 62% of all donations in 2025 were for $25 or less. But that adds up, those $2 and $3 and $10 donations do add up as a collective. So that made up about 15% of all donation dollars. On the flip side, we see that not very many people give a lot of money. Just 2% of donations are for more than $250. But that also has a really, really big impact because those donations are big. So about 30% of donation dollars come from those donations of more than $250. And I like to call this out because I think it's a really good reminder to be using donation levels and to use them well. You want to make sure that you always have an option for a $10 donation, a low dollar donation, because I think if you start your donation levels at $50, you run the risk of those people who maybe only have $10 to give, feeling like their donation isn't then needed. It isn't worthwhile to add a custom donation for $10 because it doesn't feel like it's a valuable amount to you. So you want to make sure that those people know that that amount is still valuable. At the same time, I highly encourage the flip side of that, having a donation option for $1,000. If people don't know you have a need for large dollar donations, they might not give that. So make sure you have a range of options there. And I think it is really useful to use donation levels that track and make sense for your organization instead of just saying like gold, silver, bronze, whatever generic leveling you can have there. Having donation levels that say 10 free meals, 25 free meals, feed a family for a year. That really ties the donation to an actual action and an actual good, and I think will help you to boost your donations significantly. Donation and fundraising options. This is looking at the three kind of buckets of donations on the RunSignup platform. So first we have just standard donations. There are people coming through your registration pathway. They see an option to donate and they make a donation. The second option is donation checkbox. And with that, you see people who essentially, if I skip through your donation step in registration, it still shows up, but I skip it. I don't add anything there. I'm in a hurry. I just want to get to the checkout. Then I will see a little option at checkout that has a checkbox that just says, check here if you want to give $5, $10. And that is a nice second step that we see being really successful with getting more people to donate, because it's not necessarily that they didn't donate before because they don't care. They just didn't want to go through the process of reading your donation information and filling it out. And the nice thing is, if I had donated during that step, I wouldn't see the checkbox. It's not going to, it's not going to make people donate twice. It's just another reminder for them to do so. And we see that being really, really successful. If you do the donation checkbox, that is one place where I would suggest using lower dollar donations, probably nothing over $25, simply because it's just a checkbox. You don't want people to feel like they're being tricked into checking a box that is a $500 donation or something. And smaller donations feel a little bit more appropriate for that type of ask. The third way that people get donations is through fundraisers, and this is when I actually create fundraising pages. So if someone who signs up for my race gets a fundraising page, and then they go out and they ask their friends to donate and to support the event, and usually the charity that is working with the event. By far, peer-to-peer fundraising is the way to raise the most money. It's about 8 times more per race than we see for donations only. The caveat to that is it is also a lot more overhead and work for an organization. If you have the bandwidth to really support your fundraisers, provide them with resources to help them fundraise, have nice incentives for them, they do send them nice thank yous, and really engage with your fundraisers and set up kind of milestones they can pass and good ways to thank them. By all means, you should be using fundraising. If you really don't have the resources, it's okay to not do that, because you don't want to have fundraisers of people who sign up, raise their hand and say they want to fundraise for you, and then you don't have the ability to actually give them any guidance through that process. And then they have kind of a bad taste about how your organization works. I think it's better not to do fundraisers and have them be unhappy. But I think if you have the ability to do it, fundraising is a significant way to raise more for any organization. Race day trends, this will be our last section here. So how many people register actually on race day? It's about 3% of registrations were on race day in 2025. It is a little bit of an increase over what we've seen in the last couple of years, and I'll be curious to see if that's just a little bit of an anomaly or if that continues. Regardless, I think the important note is just 3% is not nothing, and it is important that you are able to accommodate those people. So making sure you make race day registration easy on people who want to register then, as well as on your team. I think typically you want to leave online registration open as long as possible, deal with on-site registration as little as possible. Even when people are on site, using QR codes to drive them back to online registration, and really keeping any sort of kiosks or, God forbid, paper registrations limited as possible, so you don't have as much to deal with on your end. Is really useful as a race. Check-in app usage. So this is looking at people who are checked in by our race day check-in app, which is the favorite feature for virtually everyone at RunSignup, employees and I think most of our races combined. Usage here is really, really high. So we've had over 60% of runners were checked in by the app in 2025. That was with about half of all races using the app. And I think what I like to note here is that we saw the largest race that used the check-in app checked in more than 26,000 runners in 2025. We also had about 7,000 races with fewer than 200 runners use the app. And I think that is useful to say, technology doesn't have to be only for the big guys. This is an easy tool. No matter the size of your race, it can make your life easier. And it is easy enough to use even if you have a small volunteer team for a small race. Scored results notifications, looking at how many races sent out, either split or result notifications at races. 16% of races sent notifications, and I think it is another one where it's noticeable, like it's useful to kind of note how many of those races were actually sending, under 500 notifications. So I think, these are the kinds of things that can make your race feel a little bit bigger and a little bit more professional, but they don't have to be only for very large races. RaceJoy is our runner tracking app. In 2025, we released a new feature for split times, or I'm sorry, for timing points. Previously, RaceJoy was used only with GPS, so it was tracking real time on someone's phone, and that is someone carrying their phone. And that is still going to be the most accurate tracking because it is literally exactly where someone is at any given moment. But we know there's a percentage of runners who are never going to carry their phones. And because of that, we also offer the option now to integrate timing points into RaceJoy app. And that means if I have timing mats out at splits on my course, it will provide updates based on that through RaceJoy to provide some extra tracking for spectators, as well as progress points for the runners on course. And that, we've seen a significant increase in races using RaceJoy because of that. And we've also seen a lot more participants being tracked, more spectators. I think that will only continue to increase as the predictive pace in there gets a little bit better and more races are using the timing splits option. Race day photos. We've had the race day photo platform for a number of years now. We continue to see more and more races using race day photos. In 2025, we released a pretty big update to our mobile app, which allows for taking photos and uploading them directly from the mobile app. And that allows pretty high volume photos. And I think the way that I think about this is, if you have a professional photographer who's out there taking really good quality photos for your runners, that's great. People like nice photos of them. It's worth having someone like that on course. But if you have noticed in today's world, people like having a million photos as well. They want to have photos of them all the time. And so having people out on course taking photos with a mobile app allows you a really high quantity of photos so that you can make sure that every person, when they open the results, is going to have photos that are tied to their bib number. And they're going to be able to share those photos with friends and kind of share the experience that they had. Last couple of things here. These are the two sections that I'll cover on the timer survey. Just looking at kind of who timers are. The majority of them are that we're surveying here either own or partially own their timing business. They also still often have another full-time or part-time job, and they have pretty small teams. They have, large numbers of these only have one or fewer full-time employees working for them. They have a number of part-time employees who tend to be the timers on the weekends. These are small teams who really do this because they are invested in the industry and they care about the industry. So I think they're people that have chosen to do this, and you can use them as a resource because they are here because they want to be here, because they love the industry. With that, they also do a lot more than just timing races. 71% of timers offer services beyond just timing. So if you have things that you need help with, whether that's race directing, or it's check-in, or it's volunteer management, ask your timer. It's entirely possible that it is a service that they can offer. And if they don't, they probably know someone who can. And so I think using your timers as a resource can be a really valuable way to kind of get a wider net within the industry. And that is it. I do know I had a number of questions here, so we'll see what we can go through. And if I can't get through all of them, then I will follow up with some of you later. Can you provide a short understanding of the unknown race type category? That's simply races that did not, they're essentially categories that they're picking and distances that apply. And if they did not use those within our system in a way that we can read them, it just means we literally don't know what the actual race category was. What would you attribute the negative 3.4% for ultras to? And I think that was on growth I believe. I will say our ultra data is the least reliable data that we have. And the reason for that is that a lot of virtual races are 100-mile challenges over a week, or kind of longer term, long distance events that show up as ultras within our system and are not really the same as a real ultra race. It is one of my goals to figure out a way to better report on ultras that splits that out from the virtual events, but currently we can't. And so I would really say I attribute that to virtual races, which did decline significantly this year. Event participation is those who showed up and not just those who registered. We can only report on registered. There are races that report finishers to us, but because that is not consistent across the board, we only report on registrations, not on actual known participants on race day. Can I email runners on my list only, or does RunSignup have opportunities to email a broader list of runners? We do not send emails on the behalf of any races. The reason for that is that we don't own your data. You own your data. And so, we don't think it is either our place nor actually particularly smart for us to spam runners of other races who didn't ask for emails about your races with the race information. There are organizations out there that have race lists that they're willing to work with people to get on. But typically, I would be careful about emailing people blindly who did not ask to be emailed by you. Any idea why the number of participants is falling for 40 to 59, or what that might mean? I don't think that's really means much right now, because it's not actually that we're seeing declining numbers there. It's just that we are seeing increasing numbers for the 18 to 29 and a little bit on the other side. And so just percentages shift. It's not that we're seeing fewer within that age bracket. It's just perhaps they aren't growing as quickly as those other groups. So I'm not particularly concerned. Particularly because our 30 to 59 is where we see the bulk of runners to begin with. So I think it's good that we're starting to see some growth on the margins there. But it's not, I'm not particularly concerned about that currently. We'll see if that trend continues to a big way. Missed the beginning of this webinar. Is there a way to get a copy of the slides or the presentation? Yeah, I will send out the slides along with the recording sometime tomorrow. We also post those to our website. So if you ever don't see the email, you can go to runsignup.com. If you go to knowledge base and then webinars and events, there is an on-demand webinar section there, and that will show everything up there. Does RunSignup offer the same features as GiveSignup? Yes. So the only differentiation between GiveSignup and RunSignup is that we typically consider races that do peer-to-peer fundraising to be GiveSignup races. That is really just because those events tend to be more focused on the fundraising versus the actual running portion. But the backend platform features that you have access to are exactly the same across both. You can determine which you prefer to be considered, but typically, internally, we consider GiveSignup to be races that are using peer-to-peer fundraising. Do you have an auto renew program? So in terms of races, no. You can do auto renewal for memberships. Races do not do an auto renewal option. I don't know that I know of any place I've ever seen that, but it is an interesting idea. If you were to do that, you would have to do it through more of a membership type program than a specific race program. Are you able to look at runner patterns over a longer duration? If so, do we have any idea of frequency of racing over lifetime? the same type of question across race types. No, that is something I would love to be able to do too. Our database is really, really, really detailed, and it can be really hard to pull out information like that, but I would be curious to see that at some point. You can do that somewhat through your own races, but on a broad scale, we don't have a great look at that right now. All right, I think I'm going to call it there. There are a couple here that I know I didn't respond to that I want to read more carefully and make sure I can answer you what you're actually asking. But I will follow up with emails on those either this afternoon or tomorrow. And I think thank you guys for joining us, and we'll talk to you later.
All right, thanks for watching the webinar. I wasn't in it. I was probably watching it at home too, but subscribe to the channel for more tips on how to use our platform, and check out our blogs for information about what we're going to be doing in the future, and maybe even more tips and tricks there.